Good morning, everybody. Thank you all so very much for joining us today. My name is Brian Kradish, and I am with the Harris County Public Library. We are very excited to bring you another of our Green Thumb Gardening series with the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Program and the Texas Master Gardeners and the Harris County Master Gardeners. Today, we'll be joined by Harris County Master Gardener Rick to talk about spring vegetable gardening. Before we start, I'd love to do a little bit of housekeeping. Please feel free to like and share our program today. And please comment any questions that you have. Let us know where you're joining us from. We love to see where people are watching us. And make sure you share the event as much as possible. The more people we get to like and share our videos, the more that we get to do these. We've been doing these virtual Master Gardener videos for a little while now, and they've done really, really well. We're really excited to continue the program. And in fact, one of the things that's really nice that we just put together is, let me grab this here, a link for a playlist of all of our older Master Gardener videos. So if you're interested in watching any of our previous videos, you can join us at our YouTube page, which I just posted the link to, and you can watch all the older videos that we have. So you can go back, pause, watch a slide there if you're looking at something, and get the information on that side. So again, please ask us lots of questions. We love to have questions. Ask them throughout. Our Master Gardeners may answer them in the chat, and then we may answer some of them live on air throughout the program. So without any further ado, I'm going to bring on our Master Gardener today, Rick. Rick, good morning. How are you doing today?
Good. Good morning, everyone.
Excellent. We're going to go ahead and just jump right into it. So Rick, take it away, and I'll be back in a little bit when you're ready for some questions.
Sounds good, Brian. Thank you very much, Brian. Like Brian said, my name is Rick Castagno, and I am a Harris County Master Gardener, and I'll be your presenter for this Green Thumb gardening series on spring vegetable gardening. One thing I want to mention about being a Master Gardener, we are trained to assist the extension and actually trained by the AgriLife Extension, and our sole purpose is to provide information on horticulture to the public. Now, that information is both relevant and research-based. Next slide, please. A couple of plugs before we get started, and that is the remaining Green Thumb series for 2022. You can see there after in March, we're going to have on composting. And then you can see just the others. They happen every second Monday of the month. And with the public library, they happen on the third Tuesday of the month. Next. My final plug is on the 2022 plant sales that the Master Gardeners are hosting. On the left-hand side, you see we have the Southeast sales, which is at the Genoa Friendship Gardens. We will be having our tomato sale this weekend. So order online, and you can pick up this Saturday, or you can come visit us on Monday, which is open garden days. In March, we're going to have our fruit tree sales. April, we're going to do our spring vegetables and pepper sale, and then wrap it up in May with our perennial and herb sales. We also have sales going on the northwest side at Weekly Park. They already had their fruit tree and tomato sale, but coming up in April, they're going to have a spring perennial and vegetable and herb sale. Those are all done in person. Next. So let's jump right into it. So why do we like to grow our own vegetables? Well, the number one reason is homegrown vegetables just taste better. A nice tomato out of your garden just tastes so much better than store-bought. You get to control the pest management practices you make, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through, but you're in total control. You know what you put on your vegetables, when you put it on your vegetables, and so on. It's good exercise to get out and about in your garden, hopefully on a daily basis. And it's a lot of fun. Great activity for kids. It's the skill set required for gardening is perfect for kids. Digging in the dirt, planting stuff. Next. So to get things started, there are certain things you need to consider about gardening, vegetable gardening. First, the location of the garden. Where do you have room, and what is a suitable location? The space that you have available, and you need to know your planting zone, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. Knowing your planting zone will tell you exactly when you can plant certain plants and vegetables, the different varieties that work best in your zone, and also key are the frost dates that you need to be aware of. Next. So, garden location. So you need a location that receives 8+ hours of sunlight a day is ideal. That would be great. You need a soil that has a really good organic matter content, and it is well drained. It drains well. You want to have it free of competing plants, other big trees in the area. You want to stay away from those. You want to stay away from buildings that'll cause a lot of shade. You need to have a water source that is close by. You need to have good air circulation as well. That'll help with a lot of the bacteria and funguses, reducing them. And the garden should be visible. It's kind of the out of sight, out of mind. So if you can see the garden from your back porch, you tend to go to it more often than that. So let's talk about the beds and containers. We're going to talk about that for a little while. We're going to also get into the type of soil that we will put into those containers. And then we're going to talk about the plants themselves. So next slide. So first off is raised beds. Raised beds are probably the most popular method for vegetable gardening. They're easy to construct, and you keep them pretty simple. So a raised bed, you want it, if you can access both sides of the raised bed, you want it no more than 4 feet wide. You can have it anywhere from 8 to 12 inches high is ideal. You can have it even higher if you would rather actually have a raised bed where you can sit down and do gardening. The reason for the 4 feet wide is you want to be able to access the center of the bed without stepping in the bed. Stepping in your raised bed causes compaction and is just not good for the vegetables. Avoid treated lumber. So look for rot-resistant woods like cedar and redwood if you want to construct your bed out of wood. Stones or cinder blocks work great as well. You can see from the lower picture that this innovative gardener actually filled the holes of the cinder block with an additional crop. Great. And you want to fill your bed with a quality garden soil and compost. So a good rule of thumb is 2/3 garden soil and 1/3 compost. The compost is going to help you get a lot of good organic material in there. So one thing I want to mention, the previous slide, I showed you the ideal location for your garden. Well, you can see with the picture on the right, that is a raised bed that is about 2 to 2.5 feet because I only have access on one side of it. Oh, look, there's a competing building right next to it. And this area gets probably at the peak of summer, 7 to 8 hours of full sunlight a day. Yes, I can still grow a lot of good vegetables. So if you don't have the ideal, just get as close as you can to those. You can still garden and get great vegetables in your home. Next. So let's talk a little bit about containers. As you can see, the picture on the upper left is a small container. These are great for patios, small yards, and that type of thing. Whiskey barrels make great planters. Looks like they have some squash in that whiskey barrel. Or as seen on the bottom picture, you can have a tub type container, which we have lots of those out at the Genoa Friendship Gardens. The thing that you need to be cautious about when using containers is that they take more care than a raised bed or just planting in the ground. They're going to need more water. and they're going to need a bit more fertilizer. Good slow release and weekly water soluble works well. We'll talk about fertilizer in length and a little more detail here in a minute. You can just see the nutrients that are in the small container are taken up by your plant rather rapidly. So you need to keep replenishing that. Now in your pots, you need a good potting media. Do not use a garden soil. So a good potting media and compost, again, 2/3 potting media and about 1/3 of compost. This will keep your pot or your container loose. In other words, it's going to reduce compaction and will improve the drainage. Next. So, ideal garden locations. Yep, you can do it right there on your patio if you're in an apartment, or you can have a nice raised bed, as you can see on the upper right. Lower left, you can just find a nice spot to garden in the ground, or the lower right, you can do a more commercial standpoint. So all of these are excellent setups for growing your own veggies. Next. So what is an ideal soil? Let's talk about that first. So we've talked about our container. Now we're going to talk about the soil we're going to put into that container. So you want a pH around 6 to 6.5. Organic matter content needs to be in the 5 to 10% range. And where you're going to get a lot of this is from the compost. So like I mentioned before, 2/3 good quality garden soil and or potting media, depending what we're planting in, and about 1/3 compost. Remember that 50% of the pore space within your container is going to be a mixture of air and water. You want that dark texture, as you can see in the picture, and you want a sandy to a sandy loam soil. And what that means is that when you clump it in your hand, it'll clump, but then when you open your hand, it will fall free. So it doesn't stay as a clump. It's free, it's well draining. Next. So we always recommend that every 2 or 3 or 4 years, right in that range, you should get your soil tested so you know exactly the nutrients and minerals that you're missing. So you can see on the left-hand side is the actual application that you will fill out and send in. The website down at the lower right, soiltesting.tamu.edu, is where you can get this form. Now there's about 3 or 4 additional pages on this application form that will tell you exactly how to collect your sample. Once you've collected your sample, you can see you actually name it, say what kind of area you have, and what you're going to plant in it. The AgriLife extension will then return to you the soil analysis report shown on the right-hand side. And you can see in this one bed that I had tested soil, I have all the ingredients I need, except I should add 1.3 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. So now I know where I need to go to get this ideal soil. So I will add the nitrogen at a later point. So how do I add that nitrogen? Next slide. Well, we do it with fertilizers. So NPK, those are the 3 numbers you will see on the front of any fertilized container. So the way I like to think about this is up, down, and all around. So nitrogen, or up. Nitrogen helps intensify the green color in the foliage and make it very strong and healthy. Down, phosphorus. It helps maintain a strong root system and really helps support the roots, as well as helps support blooming flowers, or in our case, fruiting vegetables. And then just all around, the K, potassium, is just good vitality for the entire plant. We like to recommend that you use a complete fertilizer, and that is where the N, P, and K all have a number. So, for example, a good general 10-10-10 fertilizer works well. You can use different ratios of fertilizers work well. And we'll talk about that as we talk about plants. Remember too, with your fertilization, that whatever it is you plant, you're going to have heavy feeders and light feeders. And you can go and research some of this, but things like heavy feeders are things like tomatoes, squashes, okra. So you will need to supplement them as well throughout the growing season. Light feeders are a lot of your root vegetables, things like carrots and onions and potatoes. And of course, improve the soil structure through the addition of organic matter, such as compost. We'll say compost a lot during this talk. Next slide, please. So what kind of fertilizers do we have? I'm going to talk about two of them here. We have slow release fertilizers. These are fertilizers that will, your plant will absorb the nutrients from these type of fertilizers over time. So the slow release fertilizer will release the nutrients at a rate that makes it available to the plant for months, anywhere from 4 to 6+ months. So I like to treat the soil ahead of planting with slow release fertilizers. Next. And then we have soluble fertilizers. So these are things like fish emulsion, fish fertilizer. Miracle-Gro makes a fine liquid fertilizer that you actually spray on to the foliage to give it some additional nutrients. They're available to the plant to take up immediately. But a word of caution, always read the label carefully. If you put too concentrated of a solution on, it can burn the leaves. If you spray it on the leaves in the heat of the day, that can burn the leaves as well. So with these fertilizers, you want to apply them usually in the early morning is ideal. And they're often a bit less expensive than some of the slow release fertilizers. Next. So now we're going to talk about, so we've talked about the containers we're planting in, and we talked about the soil to put in that container. Now it's time to talk about the plants that go in there. So we need to know a few things before we can make an educated decision on what plant to put in. So you can find, this is a map of the hardiness zones for Texas. And you can see if you're in Harris County, you're going to be in, let's call it Southern Harris County, you're going to be in the zone 9A. Northern Harris County may fall into 8B, which is you have a different variety of plants and a different timing versus Dallas, which is in a 7B zone. So just know the zone that you are in. Next. From knowing this zone, you can go find these vegetable garden planting dates. This one I have is for Harris County. So it's specific to our climate in Harris County. We're going to go over a couple of things on this table. So on the upper right, you can see the website is located there where you can find this chart. So a couple of things. The dark green on this chart shows the ideal planting time. The lighter green shows the marginal or shoulder planting times. Also on the left-hand side in green towards the top, it does say that these are times for seeds, unless it's otherwise designated. So let's just run through one of these. If you can go down to tomatoes, for example. One thing to correct, if you print this out, is next to that tomatoes, you want to write the word transplant. It was omitted in this chart, but because this is the time you will plant a transplant. So tomatoes, you'll transplant a nice healthy tomato plant that you got from your nursery in the early March timeframe. And you can go all the way through mid-April on the planting zone. If it looks like we're going to have a nice mild end of February, I might even plant a little earlier, as you can see with the light green. So for example, at our gardens, we started our tomato seeds the end of December in a greenhouse so that they'll be ready, nice healthy transplants ready to go by the first week or so in March. A couple of other things to note on this chart is down at the bottom left, you can see it lists the average last freeze date. So it's different for Hobby, which is southern Harris County, versus Bush, which is northern Harris County. So the last freeze date for Hobby is around the 8th of February versus the 1st of March for the northern area. On the right-hand side in blue, it also shows the first freeze date. So again, for the northern area like Bush, it's going to be a little earlier, around the end, towards the end of November. And around Hobby, when you go south, it's going to be more around Christmas time. So this is a very handy chart to keep, and you can decide what type of vegetables you want to grow based on the growing chart here. Next slide. So now that we've selected the type of vegetable, what varieties work best? Well, again, certain varieties work best in your climate. You've got a lot of sources that you can find this out at Texas A&M AgriLife, the Harris County Master Gardener website, and we'll give you links to all these websites at the end. And that last link, which is a very lengthy link, is where you will actually find a list of the vegetable varieties that work best in our zone. So know your growing zone. We're either 8B or 9A in Harris County. Next. So when you go to the website I mentioned, and now it's shown at the very bottom of the slide, it'll list every vegetable and the varieties that work the best. Okay, so for like beans, if you want to look at a bush bean, you can see the list there, Blue Lake, others. So these are varieties that have been tested in this area and we know they grow well. Are these the only varieties that will grow in this climate? No, there are additional varieties. But I would suggest that if you're a beginner gardener, stick with these varieties. It'll help you to be more successful right off the bat. Next slide. So there's just a couple more things we're going to talk about before we get into actually talking about the vegetables. So what we've talked about so far is the location where we're going to put our bed, the type of planter we're going to use. We've talked a bit about preparing the soil and the elements you need to add to your soil based on that nice soil analysis you got from the AgriLife extension by sending in your sample. And we know how to select the actual type of vegetable. A couple more things on one is adequate moisture and drainage. We need to make sure we have both of these. So the ideal the way to water your garden is through a drip irrigation system. This puts the water right at the roots of the plant where you want the water. Yes, you can water from above as shown in that lower picture, but if you're going to water in that manner, you're going to want to do it early in the morning so that the leaves will have time to, the water will have time to evaporate off the leaves during the daytime, and you won't get any diseases that are caused by too much moisture. So don't water in the evening, do it in the early morning, and try and keep the water as close to the root system as possible. One of the most common mistakes we've found that beginner gardeners do is they overwater. They water too much at times. So vegetables, plants in our area need about 1 to 2 inches of water each week, especially in our June and through August timeframe, the hottest part of the season. So what is an inch of water? Well, an inch of water equals 65 gallons per 100 square feet. You're going to hear us talk about 100 square feet a lot. And that's just a raised bed, for example, that is 4 feet wide by 25 feet long. That's 100 square feet. Raised beds are great for drainage, as we mentioned before. And you'll always want to use your compost. Told you I was going to say compost a lot. It holds moisture and it helps improve the drainage, as well as providing a lot of the nutrients as well. Next slide, please. So the final thing we're going to talk about before we get into talking about some of our plants is mulch. Mulch is always a great idea to put around your plants. It helps to retain moisture in the soil. It'll regulate the temperature of the soil. So during our really hot months, it'll keep the soil just a little bit cooler, which is nice. And it helps to control weeds. So what type of mulch works best? Well, you can go out and just get yourself some mulch. Compost is a great mulch, but it tends to be a bit more expensive. If you have leaves, pine needles, or even access to straw, those are all fine mulching materials. Next slide. So we're about to get into talking about specific vegetables for our area. Brian, are there any questions that I might be able to answer so far?
No questions yet, but we've had a lot of great postings from the master gardeners. They've been posting all the links that we've been talking about. So if you've been watching and you wanted that soil information or you wanted the planting guide, all the links are posted in there, which is wonderful. At the end, we're going to post a little bit of a survey as well. So we ask everybody to please help us out with that survey. It's so important for us to get it. It takes about a minute to do. We'll post it at the end of the program. If anyone does have any questions, please type them in. Our master gardeners, they are answering up a storm and putting all kinds of links in there. So it is great. Tons of great information going on the chat from our master gardeners at home that are working on there. But Rick, I think we're going to have you just continue with our specific vegetables, and we'll see if there's some more questions at the end.
Fantastic, Brian. Thank you.
Perfect.
So next slide. So we're going to get into the vegetables now, and I'm going to talk about vegetables from a family perspective. So nightshade family includes tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, potatoes, tomatillas. Those are all in a single family of plant. The reason I'm mentioning families is because you'll want to do some crop rotation in your area. Crop rotation means you plant one family at a time in the same area. So if you planted tomatoes in a certain area of your garden, next growing season, you're not going to want to plant peppers in that same spot, nor tomatoes again. You're going to want to plant another family like the legume family, which we'll talk about. So crop rotation is important to maintain the nutrient level in your garden. And also if you get soil diseases specific to that family, you're switching it around and not giving it a chance to continue or flourish. Next slide. So we're going to talk about tomatoes, and we're going to talk about tomatoes in detail. Well, for a little bit anyway. Some of the master gardeners always get tons of questions on tomatoes. So getting right into tomatoes, you want to find plants that are resistant varieties. And you'll see these letters after the plant at your local nursery. If they don't have a string of letters after the plant, just ask them what the plants are resistant to. Those letters, as you can see in the footnote on the very bottom, shows that those plants are resistant to various kinds of wilt or resistant to nematodes in the soil, or they can be resistant to viruses and other things. So you want to find plants that are resistant to some of these diseases. You'll want to get large, vigorous plants. The bigger on the tomato, the better you are most of the time. And you'll want to incorporate anywhere between a fourth to a half a cup of a complete slow release fertilizer at planting. Or if you have a large raised bed, you'll want to do somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 pounds of a good 10-10-10 per 100 square feet. Tomatoes, as I mentioned, are heavy feeders, so you'll want to apply a weekly foliar spray of a good soluble fertilizer, as we talked about before, which will provide lots of good micronutrients to the plant. You'll also want to work in anywhere from 2 to 3 tablespoons of a high nitrogen fertilizer after you get your first cluster of fruit or tomatoes. So something like ammonia sulfate, which is a high nitrogen. You'll see the numbers on that are a 2100. So that's basically all nitrogen. Next slide. So how do we plant tomatoes? Well, you plant tomatoes deep. And what that means is that kind of goes against what you hear on planting almost every other vegetable or plant for that, or flower for that matter. Tomatoes are unique in the sense, we'll start on the left-hand side. Tomatoes are unique from the standpoint that anywhere the stem is buried in the ground, roots will grow from that. So a technique we like to use is what we will lay it down in a trough. So the next picture over shows we've dug a nice trough. We've put in our fertilizer that we mentioned earlier. Mix that fertilizer all around. You'll lay your nice large tomato plant in that trough, and then you'll remove all the lower leaves from that, or branches from that, so that you have nothing but pure stem. And you'll want to then just lift up the tip, the top 2 to 3 inches, and then bury it all. And that's going to give you a really nice, healthy root system that will support that tomato plant and provide lots of flowers and tomatoes. Next. So you can see on the upper picture, the ideal planting is that's a raised bed that we have out at Genoa Friendship Garden. And it's about 4 feet wide by 25 feet long. It's a nice 100 square feet. And we've got about 15 tomato plants in there. One of the keys is to stagger your plants. So we have 2 rows and they are staggered. That way you can work and tend to all sides of the tomato from any angle. What not to do? Well, I have a good example of that. The bottom 2 pictures. The bottom picture, it shows that, okay, I have a couple of tomato plants there in that bed. And then it's hard to see, but there's a bunch of small tomato plants planted in 2 rows, one right behind the other. So I've got about 15 tomato plants. I wanted lots of tomatoes. So in March, it looked great. But in May, I had a mess on my hands, as you can see from the other picture towards the right. It was just a jungle in there. I did get a lot of tomatoes, but I had a mess trying to manage it and keep it clean. So again, ideally stagger your plantings. You can have multiple rows, but make sure you stagger them so you can work all angles. Next slide. So let's talk about temperature and fruit set. So when we talk about fruit set, you can see on the picture that nice little flower that will turn into a tomato. So fruit set is all influenced by nighttime temperatures. So if you have nighttime temperatures that are consistently below 50 degrees, you'll have what's called flower drop. Of course, if you have flower drop, you're not going to get a tomato from that flower. If you have nighttime temperatures that are above 70, the mid 70s, you can get flower drop as well. So that's why in our area, you can see from the illustration on the bottom, in March, our nighttime temperatures tend to be above 50 degrees. The average is 51 degrees. And as you go through April and May now you're averaging 66 degrees, ideal for fruit set in your tomatoes. So as we start to get past June, we're starting to raise our average evening temperature or nighttime temperatures into the low, and then July, mid 70s. So if you plant in early March, your plants will be nice and healthy and strong come June, and they'll be able to resist some of that flower drop even when temperatures get to be in the mid 70s. Next slide. So it's always a question, do we stake our tomatoes or do we cage our tomatoes? Both are acceptable. And actually at the garden, we use both. We will stake our young tomatoes, and as they get bigger, we'll cage them. So staking a tomato, you want a stake that's about 6 feet long, and you want to put it about 10 inches into the ground. And you do this fairly close, right after transplanting. The reason for that is if you wait for it to become more mature, you're going to disrupt the root system when you put that stake in the ground. You'll want to tie them loosely about every 12 inches. This is a perfect use for all those twist ties you got hanging around the kitchen. You'll want to remove and do some pruning. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that, right in, especially in the leaf axils. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. Caging, the benefits of caging is it's a little bit less on the pruning side, and therefore it's a little bit less maintenance. But either are great. Next slide. So for pruning, the diagram I have up right in the middle shows, on the lower, shows the axil of the plant. And you'll get these little suckers, we call them suckers, that grow up in that axil. You'll want to pick those off. All they're going to do is steal nutrients from the plant that will be used by the flowers and later tomatoes. At the very top, you see what we call the growing tip. Especially for indeterminate tomatoes, once we get the tomato plant to the height we want it out at the garden, we clip off these growing tips, and it'll stop the tomato from growing up any taller. As you can see from the picture on the lower right, I'm not sure anybody really needs a 10 to 12 foot tall tomato plant. And one other thing on pruning, as you can see in the lower left, towards the ground, I like to keep the leaves or the branches off the ground. That just promotes things like early blight and other diseases. So I like to keep the leaves trimmed up the plant a bit. Next slide. So when is a tomato ripe? Question everyone always asks. Next. So we'll go through the different stages of ripening of a tomato. So the first stage is what we call green. Pretty much it's completely green, either a light green or a dark green. If you like fried green tomatoes, this is a perfect time to pick it. Next. Stage 2, or we call it the breaker stage. We're just starting to break into a yellow or pinkish red color. And so at stage 2, 10% of the fruit is now starting to turn this yellow or pinkish color. Next. Stage 3, the turning stage, we now have between 10 and 30% of the fruit is now turning this pink, yellowish, or red color. Next. The pink stage, or stage 4, we've now got 30 to 60% of that fruit is changing color and is turning either pink or kind of reddish. Next. Stage 5 is the light red, where we've got 60 to 90% of that fruit is now starting to get more and more red. Next. And then we finally have what we call red. It's the ripest stage of all. So over 90% of your tomato has now turned a nice red color, ready to be picked and eaten. One of the biggest questions we get is, how do I keep squirrels away from my tomatoes or birds? If you have a squirrel or bird problem, um, it can be really not devastating, but unfortunate to say, okay, I'm going to wait one more day and get this nice red color, and you go out there in the morning and it's got a big piece taken out of it by a squirrel. So the easiest way to keep squirrels and birds away from your tomatoes is to pick them early. So pick them at stage 4. We at the garden have even picked them at stage 3 and put them on the kitchen counter. And in a couple of weeks, they'll ripen into a nice deep red color. Um, so tomatoes will ripen off the plant. It may take a week or so, but I would say if you have a squirrel issue, pick them early. Stage 4 is ideal. Next. So let's talk about tomato pests. Before I get right into the tomato pests, I need to give a plug for integrated pest management, which I'm sure a link will be provided by one of our master gardeners out there. When we talk about integrated pest management, it all comes to the point of we want to use the lowest harming item, if you will, that will for the environment. So we're going to start with the least invasive to the environment. You can contact your local nurseries to get help on some of these pest controls. And then whatever you do not use a broad spectrum type insecticide. So speaking of tomatoes specifically now, hornworms is a big issue. You can simply, number one, pick them off. That's your first best way to control them. If they're getting a little bit out of control, especially the smaller ones, you can use things like insecticidal soap. Again, very organic. Then you can go to higher strength things such as BT or into the chemical realm, which is 7. The leaf-footed bug. So a leaf-footed bug has that piercing, sucking mouth part that it will get nutrients out of the tomato by piercing it. The saliva from the insect will then cause a discoloration of your tomato. If you have 1 or 2 of these, so the best way to get these off is just to brush them off, shoo them away. If your tomato gets infested with a lot of leaf-footed bugs, it's going to change the flavor of the tomato, and it's not pleasant. Some other remedies besides shushing them off is a neem oil, spinosad, and then you can see a variety of other things. But we always recommend starting with the least harmful to the environment. Early blight, I talked about it just a second ago. It's that yellowing of the leaves, usually lower in the plant, and it'll creep up the plant. So first thing I always do when I see a leaf with early blight is remove it. There are other, besides removing it, you can use things like potassium bicarbonate, you can use copper products, and you see there I have several other suggestions that you can use. But clipping them off helps to maintain it. A lot of it in my world anyway. Next. So let's talk about what varieties of tomatoes grow best in Harris County. Well, in the upper left, we've got the Brandywine, which is an indeterminate, and it's a very large tomato. So it's going to be in the 12 to 16 ounces per tomato. Right below that, we have the Celebrity, which is a determinate type. And it's a medium size. So it's going to be in the less than 12 ounces, usually around the 9 to 12 ounce range. You have Romas, which are very nice growing in Harris County. These are determinate. And you'll see a label by some of the Romas saying paste. What that means is that certain tomatoes are actually grown for making tomato sauces and tomato pastes. So when you see that, the meat on that tomato is going to be much denser and less liquid. So it's ideal for making sauces and pastes. If you like that type of tomato, Romas are a great choice. And then if you like the smaller cherry type tomatoes, Juliet is an indeterminate brand, and it's a small tomato, very, very tasty. Next. So let's talk about peppers. So again, you want to get transplants that are 4 to 6 inches tall. You want fertilizer if you're planting in your bed. You want your fertilizer 2 to 3 pounds of a good 10-10-10 per 100 square feet. If you're planting just a single plant, you want a couple of tablespoons when you in that planting zone when you plant. At first fruit, you're going to add another 2 tablespoons around each plant and work it into the soil. You'll harvest anywhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 weeks after transplanting, and you want to get the peppers when they're nice and shiny and firm. Next. What varieties are great in the Harris County area? Well, there's a variety of serrano peppers that work well if you like the hot. Jalapenos do great in this climate. If you like the sweeter, more bell pepper type, Big Bertha is a great choice, and Summer Sweet is also an excellent choice for this area. Next. And who can talk about peppers without having the Scoville units of heat? So you can see at the very bottom, a sweet bell pepper is 0. So it's sweet. As you move up, jalapeno gets in the 3,500 to 8,000 unit range, which is getting a bit spicy. You can see up there, you keep going up to the Scotch bonnet or habanero peppers are starting to get really hot. So this is just information for how hot do you like your peppers. You can go get a style that fits your taste. Next. Eggplant. Eggplant is another popular plant in our area. So fertilizing, again, 2 to 3 pounds of a good 10-10-10 per 100 square feet. You're going to make 2 applications of this. You're going to do half at planting when you put the plant in, and you're going to do the other half at first fruit. So you'll harvest eggplant in anywhere from 60 to 80 days after you transplant. And you'll want to get the eggplant when it's anywhere from a third to full size. This is when the skin is nice and shiny. If you wait too long after it's full size, the skin will start becoming dull. Seeds are going to become very hard, and it's not going to be as tasty as it would be if it were younger. Next. Varieties for Harris County, there's lots of them. The Black Beauty is a nice big eggplant. You can get early long purple, works well here as well. And you can also do a variety of colors. There's white eggplant, there's yellow. So you have a lot to choose from in the eggplant family here. Next. We'll talk a little bit about legumes. In the legume family, we have the green beans, lima beans, southern peas, and English peas. Next. So let's talk a little bit about beans. You've got your bush beans and you've got pole beans. So you're going to want to plant these in the March-April timeframe. Just refer to the chart I showed earlier. And you can plant again in September if you want a fall crop of beans. They usually take anywhere from 55 to 80 days to harvest. The bush type bean matures a bit faster than pole beans. The advantage of pole beans, though, are if you don't have a lot of garden area, you can grow your pole beans up on a trellis. You'll want to harvest them when they're young and tender, and beans will grow fairly rapidly, so you'll pick them frequently. Again, the fertilizer here, so this one's a little different. It's still the 2 to 3 pounds of a good 10-20-10. So you'll want a little bit more phosphorus for your beans. Next. What varieties work great here? Well, when we talk about pole beans, the Blue Lake is a winner. The bush type bean, the Roma 2, is an excellent bean for our area. Next. So let's talk about southern peas. These you want to plant anywhere from April through July, long planting time zone. They like the nice warm soil. Moderate on the fertilizer from that end. They're like we mentioned earlier, they're more on the light feeder range. You're going to want to harvest them when that pod are mature and just start turning yellow. They are nitrogen fixing plants, which means they will actually add nitrogen back to the soil, making them a great crop rotation item. Next. The varieties that work best in Harris County, well, I have several of them listed there. Again, that website at the bottom, and I'm sure it's been posted already, is where you can go to the AgriLife extension and get the 4 pages on all the varieties of the different vegetables you can grow in Harris County. Next. So what are some of the common problems with lagoons? Well, aphids, we call it the pea aphid. It transmits viruses. So the ladybird beetle loves these aphids, and that will help clean them up. We don't have a lot of ladybugs. Sometimes they're just not around. If you see aphids initially, you can just spray them off with the hose. So that's the first thing. Just keep spraying them off with a hose. You can use a little bit of soapy water. You can use horticultural oils. And if all else fails, then you can think about the chemical side, which is malathion and 7. So again, when you talk about integrated pest management, you can see here we go from the least invasive, which is just spraying it off with water. Then it gets a little more intense with soapy water, a little more intense with the horticultural oil, and finally, chemical if you have to go that route. Next. So I mentioned the virus that the aphids will transmit, and one of the common ones is this pea mosaic virus. You can see on the leaf, the darker area, it looks mottled in appearance. There is nothing that can control this virus. No chemicals can control it. When you see that your plant has this virus, you need to pull the plant, wrap it in plastic, tie it up tight, and throw it away. Next. So we'll talk a little bit about gourds and the gourd family. So things like squash and cucumber, muskmelon, which is cantaloupe in our area as well, watermelon, pumpkins, and gourds. Next. So summer squash, everybody likes to grow summer squash. But they do need space. You can grow them in containers, but you're not going to, for a family of 4, 1 or 2 plants will provide lots of either zucchini, yellow, or scallop squash for the entire family. You'll want to plant them in mid-March to early April. Again, space them about 2 to 3 feet apart. You're going to want to use 2 to 3 pounds of a good 10-10-10 fertilizer per 100 square feet. If you have just a few plants, put 2 to 3 tablespoons around each plant. And once you get first bloom, you'll want to add another 2 tablespoons or so per plant. Now, squash is a plant that is self-pollinating. Next. So on the same plant, you will have both male and female flowers. To tell the difference, the top picture is a male flower, so it goes just straight from the stem to the flower. The bottom picture shows the fruit, the squash starting, and then the flower is on top of that. So that is what is getting pollinated to get your zucchini or your squash to produce. Good illustration here of the difference between a male and a female flower on squash. Next. So the varieties in Harris County, well, starting from the left side, you've got your straight neck squashes, You've got your crookneck squashes right below that. Your green scallop type squash in the center. The upper right, you can do butternut squash. That's more of a winter squash. So the question always comes up about squash borer beetles, and they devastate squash all over the county, obviously. But so you can find some squashes that are resistant to these squash borers. Tatumi is one of the ones we're going to try out at the garden this spring. I've also seen it on the internet as Tatuma. But it's a nice baseball-sized squash and delicious as well. Next. Cucumbers. So you have either slicing or pickling cucumbers. You're going to want to plant these in the March to April timeframe. The best way to do it, I feel, is to trellis them up. As you can see in the lower picture, we've got the trellis and the vines are just growing up there. The vines will be anywhere from 10 to 12 inches long. You don't have to trellis it, but I've found it just keeps the cucumbers off the ground and keeps them much healthier throughout the season. You'll want a cup of 10-10-10 fertilizer for each 10-foot row, and about another half a cup or so for each 10-foot row once the vining starts. Next. So the varieties for Harris County. Well, for pickling, you've got the County Fair, which is a wonderful pickling cucumber. And you've also got the burpless, which is an excellent slicing cucumber. Next. So let's talk about melons. Again, melons you'll want to plant in the April to mid-June timeframe. You're going to do a couple of applications of fertilizer. Again, a total will be 2 to 3 pounds of a good 10-10-10 per 100 square feet. You'll do half of that at planting and half of that when the vines begin to run. One thing with melons, which I've also found with cucumbers, is keeping them off the ground really helps from getting soft spots on the fruit and it turning mushy. So on the lower picture, you really can't see it there, but they make these little stands that you can actually put the melon on. It keeps it off the ground. Or on the upper picture, you can use the old pantyhose trick and just tie a pantyhose around the cantaloupe. And if you're using trellising system, you can just hold it up there, tie it to the trellis, and it'll get big and ripe right there on the trellis for you. Next. The varieties of melon for Harris County, well, you've got a couple there, that the Uvalde and the Tamdu, which are helped develop by Texas A&M. And you also have very popular, the Ambrosia cantaloupe. Next. Now I'm going to talk a bit more about the common problems of the gourd family or cucurbits. Powdery mildew is always an issue, and it's caused by what we call stressors. Stressors are things like high humidity, extreme temperatures. Okay, well, that just described Houston summer. Too much water, too little water, nutrient deficiencies. Some of the best things I've found for powdery mildew is just remove those leaves that have the powdery mildew on them. Again, if you're out in the garden quite often, or like at least daily, you can catch this stuff as it just starts. The squash borer, vine borer, the picture in the center it's actually a moth, and that's an adult. The adult does nothing to your plant. It's when it lays its eggs, and the larvae will then bore down into the actual vines, as you can see on the lower right, and it will get its nutrients from the squash itself. And yes, it can devastate, if you have an infestation, it can devastate the entire squash plant or garden in a matter of days. On the upper right, you see the squash bug. Again, in picture A, the adult isn't really an issue. It's those eggs they just laid. And in B, you can see the nymphs that are coming from those eggs, and they will just get their nutrients from the plant itself and eventually kill the plant. Best way to take care of these, again, keep an eye on your garden, keep a watch for them, and brush them off as you see them approach. Next. Okra. So okra is a very popular southern dish, and it's in the mallow family, and it's got a fairly wide planting season, anywhere from April to July. You'll harvest okra 50 to 60 days after you transplant it. Fertilizing, you're going to want to use 2 to 3 pounds of a 10-10-10 per 100 square feet. You see, we're pretty consistent on the amount of fertilizer for a lot of these plants. After the first harvest, you'll want to add about another cup per 10-foot row. You'll want to harvest them, what I have found, when they're about 3 to 4 inches in length, and that is when they're the most tasty. If you're not out in the garden a lot, an okra can get to be 12 inches long in a matter of a few days. So that's why you need to be in the garden, especially with okra, picking it often. If you really, really like the variety of okra you grew this year, you can just snip those pods off and just let them dry out, and then you'll have seeds with the same variety that you can grow next year. Next. One of the things to talk about with okra are nematodes. Is an issue. Now, a nematode is nothing but a microscopic worm that actually lives in the soil. There are some beneficial nematodes that feed on fungi, bacteria, and other organisms. But there are also some that are very harmful, and they actually feed on your plant. You can see from that picture on the upper left, those little nodules on the root system. Basically, it damages the roots to such a degree that the plant no longer has the ability or reduces the ability to get water and nutrients from the soil, and will kill that plant. So you want to purchase plants that are resistant to nematodes. How do I get rid of nematodes if they're in my soil? Well, there's what we call crop cover. You can use a Bermuda grass. That's a picture shown in the upper right. Or you can use alfalfa. Just cover the entire row with that Bermuda grass. And over time, of course, it has to be resistant to nematodes. And over time, it will reduce and eliminate the population of nematodes. You can also do what is called soil solarization, which is the bottom picture. You cover that bed with a plastic and just let it bake all summer long, and it'll kill the nematodes. Next. Varieties for Harris County. Well, you've got the Cajun Delight, which is a nice green okra. And you also, if you like colors, you've got a burgundy that'll grow nicely in our climate. Once again, there's the website that we show at the bottom that you can go get all the varieties of vegetables for Harris County. Next. So just in summary, we talked about the location to select for your beds. We talked about the soil that you need, how to prepare your soil. Once you get your soil analysis back from the extension, you know exactly what nutrients and to put into your soil. You now know how to select the correct variety of vegetable for our area. You know that now the right planting time. Again, use mulch on the surface area to help maintain the soil temperature, keep it a little bit cooler during our hot times. It also helps with weed control. We talked a bit about some of the diseases and nutrients that you need to give the vegetables, and proper watering. And we talked a little bit about the optimum harvest times. Next. So thank you all very much for supporting Harris County Master Gardeners and coming to this presentation. There are the websites I mentioned to you earlier, and I'm sure they've been posted several times for the AgriLife extension in Harris County, the Harris County Master Gardeners. And if you have a question, you can also go to the Ask a Master Gardener website.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Rick. That was wonderful. We've had a lot of great links posted by our Master Gardeners. We had a couple questions answered. So as I'm doing my kind of wrap up, if anybody has any last minute questions, please type them in the chat. We posted a link to our survey. Please take that survey. It takes about a minute to do. It is actually for the Harris County Master Gardeners, but they're going to share the information with the library as well. It's so very helpful to the continuation of our program, just so we can make sure that everybody's really getting something out of it. We had some great viewership today, so some really high numbers. We're really excited for that. Oh, okay, there we go. Some comments, some thank yous, great presentation. I think everyone really liked it, Rick, and I'm not seeing any questions come in. You must have answered everything for everybody.
I guess that's what I'm going to assume.
Yeah, that's what we're going to assume. So as we're wrapping up, please, again, like and share. You can watch any of our older Master Gardener videos. I'm going to post that YouTube link in one more time once I find it. Where's my share and link button here? There we go. Let's type that in the chat. Oh, will we have any more freezes? Okay. How is your weather prediction coming along, Rick? Are we going to have any more freezes this year?
Well, I'm not going to worry about it after this weekend. This weekend it's going to get close again, and I think we're going to be fine for the rest of the year.
There you go. You heard it from Rick.
Wait until after this weekend.
if you get through this weekend, we'll be good. Yeah. I just thank you everybody so much for watching. We really appreciate it. The presentation slides are going to be saved on the video. So the best way to do is just to watch the video again. You can pause it at any time, or you can contact the Harris County Master Gardeners and they may be able to email it to you. Is probably the best way to do that. So as I'm getting these last questions in, thank you all so very much for watching. We will be back next month, the third Tuesday at 11 o'clock for our next Harris County Master Gardeners. And I believe somebody was saying it's on mulch. So if you have any of your mulch questions, that's the time to ask. Composting. Yes, composting is our next one. So thank you everybody very much. We will see you next month. Bye.